absolute reductions as compared to the 25% absolute reduction that would have been required in the example from the previous video. The way that we can translate emissions intensity to absolute terms is by multiplying the intensity by the projected production to convert to absolute emissions, and you can see that translation here across the middle. If they were to proceed with setting a target with that physical intensity reduction, they would still communicate the intensity percentage, not the absolute percentage, and you can see that language across the bottom here, which shows that they would still reduce absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions by 42%, but for their scope 3 emissions, they have listed a 51.6% reduction per ton of product across the same time frame. This really allows the business a little bit of greater flexibility to account for business changes and growth, but it is harder to track and a little bit less preferred by NGOs. Formula Pharma definitely has a lot to consider for which target they'd like to set. Hello. We want to talk for a minute about the process for executive approval. So on the screen here, you can see the process that comes in about 3 different steps. The first is greenhouse gas target development. Hopefully at this point, you are making great progress on that. You've collected your data and understand your target options. Once you have a recommendation for what that target should be, you can then turn to focusing on stakeholder engagement and alignment and leadership buy-in. This comes in about 4 steps. One of the first things you may want to do is to assess the abatement potential. That means looking at all of the tools at your disposal that can help you achieve your target. Once you have a good idea of that, it will make your conversations easier because you can tell your leadership teams exactly what you might need to do to be able to achieve the target. In terms of the stakeholders that will be responsible for that activity, it's mostly going to be your sustainability and ESG teams working with some of your implementation teams to understand what's possible and what's likely. Once you've done that, you're likely to move into engagement with key stakeholders on your targets, and that's really to socialize the idea of the target to get their buy-in, any questions that they might have. Here you want to look to those experts within your organization who would be responsible for implementing and achieving the target and talking to them about any concerns they have or any advice or recommendations. They may have ideas that you aren't privy to if, for example, they're a facilities manager and they know some energy efficiency project that you could implement or that they're already considering. And you can really help them get bought into the target as they will be supporting the implementation of the project. So really socializing it within your organization. We tend to see that this would be in collaboration with your sustainability or ESG team in alignment with your implementation teams or potentially a broader stakeholder group of anyone who's interested in climate efforts at your company. Once you've brought together those champions, you'll move on to building a business case for setting that target. You can finalize the target options that you were considering and really use your stakeholder engagement as well as your abatement considerations to define how much it's going to cost, who's going to need to be involved, and what it's going to take to get this target achieved, that you can have that kind of packaged up nicely to bring to your leadership. So that brings us to the last step in leadership buy-in of conducting executive workshops. This is really when you meet with your leadership teams, present the target recommendations, answer any questions that they may have, and gain approval for setting that target. And this really includes all of the stakeholders that you've worked with so far, plus your C-suite or your board, whoever really has the ultimate ability to approve this target and allow you to move forward with it. That's a high-level strategy of how you can work internally to work to get your targets approved at that executive level.